and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. This is Wednesday, October 7th in 2020, and we're still dealing with the coronavirus, the elections, national rioting, all sorts of crazy things happening. And in the last weekend, the LDS Church had its October or Fall General Conference. And this has kind of spawned a lot of discussion on the internet. There's kind of a tradition in a lot of the ex-Mormon community, among the activists, of really picking apart the things that are said in General Conference and really pointing out particularly the hurtful and harmful messaging that's done there. I've certainly done this, and you can kind of search on my channel for the Undue Influence in General Conference series that I did with Luna Corbden at the time, Luna Lindsay, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. But anyone that's participated in the ex-Mormon community kind of gets the sense, sort of, that there's kind of a way of thinking that you're supposed to have if you're ex-Mormon. And some of it almost seems to be reactionary, like you have to take a position that is opposite to what the church position is just because it's kind of like an expression of rejecting the church from your mind. And these are just ways of conceiving this. This isn't actually what it is. People come out and they come to new positions on their own way. It's just that it seems sometimes like certain perspectives, certain viewpoints are not really welcome in the ex-Mormon community, even if they aren't really tied to the church, or you get to that perspective through something than simply rejecting church dogma and doctrine. And there was an example of sort of this thinking that happened in the aftermath of the most recent General Conference that I thought was worthy of looking at and using as a springboard to let people give some space and some air to some of those unpopular opinions. And we can talk a little bit about what makes an opinion unpopular and whether or not popularity is a good referendum on what is true or right. But let's go to this example just as a way to start. So I had sent a private message to the person who had expressed this unpopular opinion to see if they were open to talking about it. I've not been able to hear a response, but I didn't give them a whole bunch of lead time. But what I've done is anonymized the post so that we can better review it. But in order to get some context, we need to know what was said in the most recent General Conference. And it was taken from the comments from Elder Christofferson, where he, if you read all of the posts that are on Reddit and the various other groups, you'll get the idea that what he said was that people born out of wedlock are bitter fruit. And so in a very understandable reaction that at once rejects both that concept and the authority of the man making that statement, a lot of ex-Mormons have been posting proudly that they are bitter fruit because either their birth is something outside of the normal nuclear family that Elder Christofferson is advocating for, or that they themselves have children out of wedlock and see that as bitter fruit. And so it's kind of a way to push back against that narrative. So let's take a look first at Elder Christofferson's comments, the particular comments that are causing the outrage, and then we'll take a look at the response. So you can go to the church website where his comments have been made public now in a separate post, and I'll put that in the comments here so you can click. Look, and we're going to start Okay, so we had network issues. Hopefully we're resumed again. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go back to our tab, and what we're going to do is see if we can listen to the comments from Elder Christofferson in a post that he called Sustainable Societies. So we will take a look at that here. All right. Starting at around the 9-minute mark.
Whether aware of it or not, every man, woman, and child of every belief, place, and time is imbued with the light of Christ, and therefore possesses the sense of right and wrong we often call conscience. Nevertheless, when secularization separates personal and civic virtue from a sense of accountability to God, it cuts the plant from its roots. Reliance on culture and tradition alone will not be sufficient to sustain virtue in society.
All right, well, there's certainly a whole lot that we could talk about just in the way that he's framing things here, particularly because he's talking with the kind of a priori assumption that virtue and goodness is defined according to how the church defines it. And on top of that, when he talks about maintaining a connection between God in what constrains your decisions and choices, it's more than just the positive connection of you can do what God wants. It's also that you're not supposed to not do what God doesn't want you to do. And then if God commands something, you can't not do it. And if you want to see a full dive into the problem with this, with something called divine command morality, you can look at the happiness letter authored by Joseph Smith. We did a full breakdown on that because, Joseph's injunction for Nancy to see his illicit proposal of illegal plural marriage as something righteous rather than something iniquitous is tied to this notion that you have to be bound to God's expectations in how you make decisions in the world. So clearly problematic, but the modern church does not delve into those historical things when it tries to frame these things. So let's continue because we're getting to the meat now. Let's go for this one here.
When one has no higher God than himself and seeks no greater good than satisfying his own appetites and preferences, the effects will be manifest in due course. A society...
Again, you have to keep in mind that this is a mischaracterization of the moral framework that people who leave the church have. It assumes that when you leave the church, you no longer have a sense of right or wrong beyond what is pleasurable to yourself. It's a very cynical view of what ex-Mormons have, but again, that's not the point of this conversation.
For example, in which individual consent is the only constraint on sexual activity, is a society in decay. Adultery, promiscuity, elective abortion, and out-of-wedlock births are but some of the bitter fruits that grow out of the immorality sanctioned by the sexual revolution. Follow-on consequences that work against the sustainability of a healthy society include growing numbers of children raised in poverty and without the positive influence of fathers, sometimes through multiple generations.
All right, so we got the quote right there, which was him saying, in essence, that the things that happen as a result of what he characterizes as having a sexual moral framework, which is only constrained by consent, and that how that leads to all of these other problems that produce bitter fruit. So if we minimize that and go back to the transcript itself and scroll down to that paragraph, let's see what we got here. Boop. All right, so let's see. I think I passed it. All right. Did I pass it again? Children and youth against the headwinds of the pandemic. I pray that you will survive. Okay, well, I'm just going to have to search for bitter. Oh, this went to a different talk. That's my problem. Okay, so bitter. Okay, here we go. So a society in which individual consent is the only constraint on sexual activity is a society in decay. And it's interesting because we saw something framed like that back when the church was trying to defend its position on polygamy. It characterized things like the fall of Rome as evidence of the decay of society that can happen when you deviate from God's law of polygamy. And then he mentions adultery, promiscuity, out of wedlock births. If you click on footnote 15, since that talk, because there was such outrage online in terms of people basically saying bitter fruit was talking about individual children, then you got a lot of people protesting, and he had to make a clarification in the footnotes. I don't know if this is the first real-time footage that we've seen of an apostle amending or putting a comment on a general conference talk based on reaction just between when it was said and when it was published, but that is certainly what we have there because he's gone and corrected it. Now, just by way of example, what I can do is show you what type of reaction has happened. If I share instead this Reddit, if you search just for bitter fruit on the Ex-Mormon Reddit right now, you can see just people posting picture after picture of themselves as bitter fruits because they took his comments to say that the children themselves born out of a normal conventional family situation are bitter fruit. So that's kind of like, that was the gestalt, that was the ex-Mormon talking points. If you wanted to say that there were talking points in the ex-Mormon community, we had to characterize Christofferson's talk as denigrating children born out of wedlock by calling them bitter fruit. There were memes made pointing out that Jesus himself technically was born out of wedlock, and so he was bitter fruit, all kinds of things like that. And then a post was made that pushed back on this narrative. And let's see here, I've anonymized it so we can take a look at it without causing any problems. Let me just make sure that we have it totally anonymized. All right, and so then let's go ahead and choose that tab here, and we'll take a look at his comments. So the name's been blotted out. And he says, so I think the ex-Mormon social media is being unfair to Elder Christofferson. He did not say that a child born out of wedlock is a bitter fruit. He said that children born out of wedlock are one of the bitter fruits of the sexual revolution. I know Elder Christofferson, not well, but kind of. He's a good man in general. Sure, he drinks the Kool-Aid and has the obedience mindset, but he's not a hateful person. He would never call a person bitter fruit. What he was saying, and I think this is obvious, is that the sexual revolution has not all been good in its effects on society. One of the ways that it has been bad is the fact that more children are born without the economic, logistical, and emotional benefits of having a two-parent home. Which home is inherently more stable and nurturing. 4 hands can do more than 2. The exceptions prove the rule. This is just basic social science data at play. For example, the results of this academic study shows one aspect, that of education, of what Elder Christofferson was talking about. And he gives a link to a BBC article that talks about different outcomes in terms of education, comparing two-parent households with single-parent households. Of course, the church's position is hypocritical, as they have historically opposed comprehensive sex education, access to birth control, adoption by gay couples, gay marriage itself, and on, all things that would benefit children. The church is irrational or even cruel too often and can be fairly criticized all the time. I don't think this is one of those times. Elder Christofferson should be read in context. Yes, the church is stuck in medieval thinking on sexuality in general. Yes, they are wrong to only cite negatives resulting from the sexual revolution without also noting the many benefits to, in particular, women. Yes, they are hypocritical, accepting as holy Joseph Smith's coercive marriage to a 14-year-old and other men's wives and the concubinage and harems of the Old Testament. prophets that 12 tribes come from 2 wives and 2 concubines. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, all approved by God, and yet claiming today that the, quote, family, unquote, of a wife and a husband is the only sexuality ordained of God. There are 144 layers of crazy to unpack regarding sexuality and Mormonism, but Elder Christofferson's latest conference talk, while certainly one-sided and maybe clumsily worded, is not hate speech. He's not calling any individual bitter fruit. I'm sure that such uncharitable reading of his words is causing him and his family very real pain today. Back, mob, back. Pitchforks and torches down. All right. So this comment pushes back on what seemed to be sort of the words that were in the air, the ideas that were in the air in how a good ex-Mormon was supposed to respond to Elder Christofferson's talk. But the thing is, there's no such thing as a good ex-Mormon, as you know, is like the right way to respond as an ex-Mormon. In any population of people who each in and of themselves have diverse backgrounds, diverse viewpoints, you're going to get diverse opinions on how things are. And part of being the social creature of being human, you have to take that fact of the diversity of viewpoints with the things that happen in social contexts that are then magnified by our new world of social media, which can be that if you say something that is in a minority opinion, particularly if it's something that a lot of people feel very emotional and passionate about, then you may be met with people criticizing not just your opinion, but you as an individual, labeling you with names, asserting that perhaps you don't belong in the community that you're at. If you go and find this particular post and look at the comments, you'll see that there's been a mixed number of responses. A lot of people agreed with his position, and some people said that he was completely mistaken. It was actually a pretty reasonable mix of responses. I don't think that there's been an unhealthy level of vitriol on this particular thing, but it was a relatively safe type of conversation to have, even if it was an unpopular viewpoint. And I think the word that he used that is very important is whether or not we have a charitable interpretation of what the church or the general authority is saying. And for me, I think that's very important. As critics of the church, we all approach our commentary and what we point out as issues in the church from our own moral framework. And it can be very tempting to take something that a general authority has said, that maybe clumsily said, or maybe a word was used that we could interpret in a benign way or interpret in a way that just makes him seem really, really bad and hateful. And, you know, if it's more if it makes more of a social impact, more of an ideological punch, then we'll use the less charitable interpretation in order to try to stir more discussion, in order to bring more moral force to the argument that we're trying to make, when that may not be the best way to actually go forward. I think that we preserve more integrity as people who are trying to make helpful and healthy commentary on the problems of the church if we apply a charitable perspective to what they say, which is that we try to assume that they are not bad people, that they are speaking from a different moral paradigm that has things like divine command morality and everything, and point out the problems where they exist, but don't exaggerate and make up problems where they don't necessarily exist. Don't assume bad intent or ill intent where they don't exist. And you can do that and yet still acknowledge that some of the things that they say are hurtful, are toxic, are bad, just because of what is said, regardless of the intent itself. So there is something important to think about that. Now, what I would like to do for the rest of this is to invite you all to tell us, share with the community some of the things that you think are unpopular ex-Mormon opinions. And they may be things that I think, for a lot of reasons, people may not actually want to say them itself, because we are at a moment in time right now where such importance is given to words and the heartful potential of words that in many cases people are afraid to even articulate a perspective or a point of view that could be perceived as being hurtful to one group or another, because the idea is that those words would give sanction or give power or vitality to those hurtful elements, or could themselves actually cause harm. And that's kind of it's a dead end, rhetorically speaking, for a society if they're not able to actually say the things that we need to unpack as a society, understand, and move forward on. Because, there's this question that keeps happening for ex-Mormons is, if you don't believe the church is true, what is true now? How do you define truth? We've explored this in a few other past episodes, but there's this notion of provisional truth, where there's a truth that you can adopt, or a source of truth, or a perspective on truth that you can adopt once you leave the paradigm of the church, but it is provisional in that you are allowing yourself to reinvent and come to new realizations and new ideas. A great example of this that we've seen sort of as a society is on the issue of satanic child abuse that happened in the 1980s. There was a moment in time where if you were a health professional and you pushed back on the idea that there were repressed memories that maybe were the result of the connection between unethical and uninformed therapeutic practices and the human biology about memory formation and recall, that when they came together created this storm of things that were called repressed memories that were then recovered, that didn't actually take place and were the result of that suggestive and uninformed therapeutic process. If you pointed this out, or pointed to research, or tried to do research that pushed back against this narrative, then you were condemned for trying to defend child abuse, satanic ritual child abuse. And it was an era where it was we look back on it now and we can say that it was anti-intellectual, because the process of critical analysis, of questioning, of testing, of looking for evidence and making sure that things met the standard of falsifiability, if you tried to do that, you were condemned as being a defender of the indefensible. And so it was a really difficult moment to move on from. And if you have listened to some of the podcasts or read about that, it really took legal consequences for acting on these things for that to go away, and for that aura of passion and emotion that was centered around that issue to dissipate before people could go back and study it and really try to figure out what was going on, because it was so emotionally and politically and socially charged at the time. They couldn't do it at the moment that it was happening. So the idea there then is there are some things maybe that you would want to say that are in the in the arena of politics, of how we deal with Mormonism itself, anything that you couldn't normally say. And this may be a dead end. There may be no one who wants to do. But what I've done is I've changed my phone setup so that if you call in, I can alter your voice a little bit. So your voice is not definable. And if you want to talk a little bit about maybe a time that you voiced an unpopular opinion and then got shouted down, then we'd love to hear about it. So I'm going to go ahead and put on the banner for the phone. The phone number is 210-422-2222. I'm going to turn on my voice changer for the phone call. And if you would like to call and share your own experience with unpopular opinions in the ex-Mormon community, then we'd love to hear from you. So let's see what some of these comments are. Let's see here. Somebody says, I'm surprised Bednar did not give that talk. I can totally see what you're talking about on there. Bednar just has a reputation for being much more in that vein. All right, so let's see. I think okay, let's see. Here we go. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hey, Jonathan Streeter.
Hey, all right. So it's going to sound like a chipmunk is the one who's talking. And I'm doing that just to try to make it easier for people to call in and actually say what's on their mind, because believe it or not, ex-Mormons can be pretty vicious to people who have opinions that are not orthodox within the ex-Mormon community. So tell us a little about, I don't know why you're calling, if you have a story like that, but what's on your mind?
Well, you sound like a chipmunk. Christmas, Christmas, oh, sweet. John, I have on my radar. I have. Are you ready?
I'm ready. You said you have on your radar something. Tell me what it is.
Okay. All right. So I follow a podcast where they interviewed her who did God. Okay. Does God make?
Okay, hold on. You're cutting out a little bit.
Okay.
I think you said that you watched the podcast where they interviewed Ed Decker, who made the God Makers, and you're referring to the John DeLynn Mormon Stories podcast?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Now there's God makers that a lot of people have seen. Then there's God too. Okay. I'm not talking about God makers. That's where I saw this. I'm a go digging some stuff. So here's what I found toward me, not my job. Within God makers, which is not even worth much per se. But this section is there's a section where Gordon B. This is back in his. He's got 4 different testifying how the Hinckley they missed him several times, and other leaders, local leaders. I don't know any names.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there because you're cutting in and out, but this is what I think that you're saying, is that in the movie Godmakers 2, there's a segment where they talk about Gordon B. Hinckley, and they bring some other people to try to affirm this thing, and
Right.
you have a disagreement with something regarding that, or try going from there. I'm not sure why your line is cutting out so frequently.
I don't either. It's been working fine. Anyway, so here's the part. Mention it. They are accusing him of immorality, of going to this highfalutin house in Salt Lake, wherever. They have parties, they drink, bring women in, young. And now, so just even saying it to shudder, because who does Gordon B. Hinckley, right? He's a good guy. I like Gordon. I love.
Yeah. So to recap, there's a part in the Godmakers Part 2 where it purports to tell a story, and in the story they say that Gordon B. Hinckley attended these immoral parties which involve substance use and illicit moral sexual sin with prostitutes or things like that. And that's the part that you disagree with. Is that correct?
No, what? No, I'm getting there. I have a valid point.
Okay.
Okay. So there's news footage. Those people. This is very old news. And the government say that the church owns media, any of the media outlets, especially of that they were able to the rug. And so this is it's true, this horrible thing. But here's the thing. Talking about I want to talk about this. When I posted it in a Facebook group, nobody wants I think one, but nobody even about things like that. And so you said these are just men. They're not perfect. And I don't know if it happened. If it did, I'm happy. But it damn sure.
Okay, let me make sure I understand it because it is hard for the audience to hear you. You say that in that show they use some very old news footage,
Right.
And then the idea is put forth that the reason that people don't know about it is because the church owns the news company and the church suppressed that news footage from actually getting out or something to that effect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, and then what is the part that you disagree with?
Oh, well, maybe it's like ex-Mormon. I think it's an ex-Mormon opinion. Nobody wants to any of this ski stuff, And not that I'm looking to pick up a bunch of, but it's just nobody talks about this. So am I missing your intent? I thought I was online with what you're for here.
Well, I unfortunately I'm not able to hear your final point because the audio keeps cutting out.
Darn it. Okay. Well,
Try summarizing it one more time. I changed one thing. It may be a setting on my side because this is the first time I've done the voice changer thing. Try saying it one more time.
I'm wondering. Yeah.
Okay, so regarding whether or not the church media had been suppressed by its owner, the church itself.
Right. No, I'm just saying that's one of the bullet points of what I'm laying out. My issue that when it's mentioned among ex groups, nobody wants to. It's like on the sidewalk. Nobody wants to even talk about it. It's just that's why.
Oh, okay. So in your case, you mention this and then you bring it up in ex-Mormon groups and nobody wants to talk about it. And you're like, wait, this is an actual important issue, but nobody wants to talk about it. Is that how you're perceiving it?
That is where I'm headed. Yes.
Okay. No, I think that's something that we see a lot of times. The story that you're talking about regarding Gordon Hinckley and these things, I've heard people say, well, actually, Gordon Hinckley, even though it sounds like nobody else could have that name, there was actually a couple other people with that name, and some of them got in trouble with the law, and so it was misattributed to them. And I've heard that as a possible rationale for it. And I think in some cases, the reason that things like that, things like other things where there's just not enough evidence for there to be a real case made, and then on top of that, you don't, it's so far outside of the realm of plausibility that it almost sounds like deceptive anti-Mormon propaganda. And as ex-Mormons, if you try to make a big deal about something which you don't have the evidence to back up for whatever reason, even if it's true, and then it really paints these people as really being bad character, then you end up destroying your own credibility. Because people who say, if we were going to, let's say somebody said something bad about you personally, and they didn't have the evidence to back it up, and it totally went against your personal character, well, you would kind of think that people were being unfair if they tried to make a big deal about it with you with no evidence to back it up. Presumably, it wouldn't be true because there's no evidence. Now, there is this idea that with the Mormon Church, we have to deal with a very powerful multi-billion-dollar corporation who has the power to influence things. And that, I think it's a difficult balance to play to not go into that conspiracy mindset. And so in those instances, the unpopular ex-Mormon opinion may be in the category that you sometimes see of people who go down the road of what are essentially conspiracy theories like baby sacrifice in the temple and, one person who's now a prophet having engaged in childhood sexual abuse that was ritual sexual abuse as a child. If it is true, we don't have enough evidence to make it. And if we want the charity of innocent until proven guilty to be applied to us, we have to extend that to the church leaders itself. And then you have to be careful that you don't burn out your own credibility by making a big deal about claims for which we don't have evidence when there's certainly enough things that we can reasonably talk about for which there is blatant evidence for. And so that may be one perspective on how we understand why an opinion is unpopular. Does that make sense?
It does. And
Okay.
I'm on for most of what, but all I've got is this. And, well, first of all, I'm not push conspiracy theories who killed Kennedy. But if you watch a 5 to 6 minute segment of Godmakers 2, and you watch 4 different who's call him president, and how they can a church leader like so you put the little seed, put a different Gordon. These guys were there's 4 different people. I don't think they had any. And also, for my life, especially back then, if I were them. So it just, it's, all I'm saying, watch it, take a look at that if you're using this as an example.
All right. That sounds great. So you're saying, you understand all of the things that I discussed, but you still think there is, there's enough evidence there as laid out in the God Makers that it's worthy of somebody investigating at some point, and it seems weird that that hasn't happened, as to your knowledge.
All right, it seems it hasn't happened, but what's the point? Time it's just that makes you go, and it definitely is. And nobody wants to talk about the reasons you mentioned a minute ago. You did very well, by the way.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your unpopular ex-Mormon opinion. I think that'll be something for people to consider, and we're going to go on to the next call now, okay? Thank you very much.
Bye.
All right, take care. Okay, so we'll find out if the next caller has the same audio issues, then I may have to reconsider how I'm doing this voice changing thing. I'd have it better on the other thing. So the phone lines are open once again if you'd like to call, 210-422-2222. Let's see, Adam Skelter actually shares what I think is a important opinion, but we're going to get to it after this call. All right, so hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you don't have to change my voice. I'm fine.
Okay. Let's see.
I'm pretty strong in my.
All right, here we go. Voice change off. Are you there?
Hello, brother.
Hey, I can hear you.
All right.
What's on your mind?
I hope my voice doesn't cut in and out, but.
No, it seems to be working fine now.
I'm not a caller. I've never called ever in my life. And I was like a professional driver for many years, so I listened to a lot of radio.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time I ever talked. But I'm a Mormon. Well, I'm 49, and I was raised all my life in Mormonism.
Okay.
My ancestors go back to the pioneers and this and that,
Yeah.
So can I ask you a question before I give you a statement or whatever?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
What should I be talking to you about? I mean, clarify a little bit more about
Sure.
what
the topic for today is?
What I should say. I mean, not what I should say, or what parameters I should talk within, like a river flowing.
Well, I mean, the subject for today are things that may be unpopular to say in the community of ex-Mormons, things that you feel like if you said it, other ex-Mormons would actually not be happy about.
Think I'm a weirdo.
Yeah, think you're a weirdo, or feel like maybe you're not the right type of ex-Mormon or something like that. And it may be something that you believe, or just something that you've seen other people say that they got all hopped on, that they got piled on about.
Well, I don't know much about ex-Mormons because I've only considered myself an ex-Mormon the last 3 or 4 months. 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
So I'm like a fresh newbie ex-Mormon. I'm serious.
Well,
I just learned all about troubling things like polyandry.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're still in the process of working through that.
I've listened to Dr. John DeLynn, an amazing individual from Mormon Story podcast.
Yeah.
So I've crammed a lot in the last 3 or 4 months.
I see. So what is since you're new to the ex-Mormon community, have you participated in any online social forums where ex-Mormons talk about what's on their mind?
No, I've never done that.
Oh, okay. So maybe you haven't been in the type of online social interactions that get pushback when you express an unpopular opinion.
Right. I've never experienced that.
You haven't experienced it yet. And I think that's good. Have you experienced it in the Mormon context?
I'm the type of person, this is the type of person that I am. Like, I'm one of the, to be honest and frank, which I'm always honest and frank, or at least 90% of the time. I'm a vocal type of person. I don't sit down and I'm like Ray Lewis. He's a football player.
Yeah.
A vocal. Once I learn something that I think is true, I'm like a warrior, is what I would say.
Oh, okay. So you feel like maybe if you were in those forums and you said something that you believed heartily, and people started pushing back on you, that you would not cower from that. You would rise to meet it.
I'm like a master lawyer type of guy.
Oh, okay.
So rhetoric and I'm I'm a writer is what I am. So the pen is mightier than the sword.
Well, I think
So-
that's an important point for this whole concept, and that is that when you look, what are the consequences of the sort of social culture where when somebody says an opinion that is unpopular within a group context, that the response is to say that you are something less than, so call you names, or to say that you're to basically call you names or to try to shun you or otherwise demonize you without actually responding to the disagreeable statement with counter argument.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Yeah, because
Hallelujah.
if you respond with counter argument, then you can actually move forward and learn, and you may change their mind or have your own mind change. And that's the hardest part, I think, is that when somebody comes and they says something that's unpopular, you disagree with it, and you want to educate them, and so you give them an evidence-based reason why they're wrong. It's really hard to, at the same time that you're doing that, challenge yourself and say, wait a second, I need to make sure that I'm right in doing this.
Correct. The thing, if you can define me with one word, would be philosopher.
Yeah.
And when I say that word, philosophy, it's Greek, and it means basically the love of wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you love wisdom, I take it to another. I dissect it even further, or microscope it even further. And if you love wisdom, there's a saying: knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. So knowledge is important because that's how you inform somebody. But wisdom is even more powerful because it's the application of that knowledge. So
that's a very good point. Well, since you're kind of new to this, I'm interested in getting your take on this comment from one of the viewers, Adam Skelter, particularly because one of, I think, the most provocative things that has happened among ex-Mormons is the guy who snuck into the Mormon temple and videotaped the temporal ceremony. Now, if you were raised in the church, you know how absolutely sacred and deep the temple ceremony is. And so
I've been
the question
talking about that on YouTube because I went there.
Okay.
And I know I made all the covenants. I know all the rules. Actually, I'm a high level Mormon. I'm still a Mormon on record, but because I'm just fresh, wide-eyed,
freshly
open
out of it. So his comment is,
truth.
Right. His comment is, I have no issue with people discussing and exposing the ceremonies within the temple. They're worth discussion. But recording people who have entered into a private situation have the right to expect those in attendance to respect that privacy. And so recording temples...
Can I just make a comment on that?
Sure. What is your opinion with that?
What would the founding fathers be called for their heresy and their, who George Washington, George Washington, the founding fathers, James Madison, what would they have been called? Traitors, treasonous? Is there a moral standard, letter of the law or spirit of the law type thing? You know what I'm saying?
Well,
so the justification for that filming is there should be nothing to hide. Why are there locks on communities? Why do we have locks in the temple? Why do we have security gates on the temple? I mean, because obviously we live in a wicked society, but why is there money in the temples? I mean, you have to pay for your lunch. Why couldn't it be free? This is a temple. This is the highest standard of Zion and the community of love, but it's bullshit. Excuse my language, but...
Well, I'm proud of you for only being 4 months out and already dropping 4-letter cuss words. It took me a long time.
No, you wouldn't understand. Maybe it's been 6 months, but for 2 months, I was like, fuck God, fuck everybody. I was really upset.
I remember that anger stage.
But I get through it fast because, I got my car stolen. I got $5,000 stolen from my house. And I'll get over it in a day. That's the kind of person I am.
Yeah. Well, I want to encourage you to keep reading and keep digging deep because the journey is a long one.
One thing before we leave, can I just say one thing?
What's that?
Moroni 9 is very applicable.
What is it about Moroni 9 that touches you in that regard?
Well, this is, if you've ever read it, I recommend you to read it, but I
Well,
don't have
for
my
the
scriptures in
for
front
the
of me.
audience that would want to know the context of
Basically,
what you're
it's
talking about.
it's the end of Mormonism in the Book of Mormon, because I know the Book of Mormon scholarly, actually. And not just
So,
scholarly, I know it spiritually. Like, I feasted on those words for many
what is it
years.
about Moroni 9 that is relevant and is the end of Mormonism, like you say? How do you interpret it?
No, in the Book of Mormon, I'm just telling you, scholarly talking, it's the end. There's Moroni 10, and then it's the end, right? So Moroni 9 is the second to the last. Well, it talks about the depravity of the warriors in the Mormon during the end of Mormonism and in the Book of Mormon, and talks about Moroni getting a letter from his dad, Mormon, and talks about warfare. See, I'm a general type of guy. Like, I'm 340-pound dude. Like, I'm a badass motherfucker. So, but I'm the nicest. I'm a sheep in wolf's clothing is what I am. Huh. Not a wolf in sheep's clothing. The other way around.
Well, it sounds like even if you've stepped away from belief in Mormonism or adoption of the church, that you still find that there's something of value in the Book of Mormon itself.
Well, there's truth. Like, what does the Articles of Faith talk about? You know, we seek after truth, right? There's all truth can be combined into one great whole, right? So there's a lot of faults in Mormonism, but there's truth too. You know,
I think that may actually be a good example of one of these unpopular opinions, that you can look at the Book of Mormon as a piece of literature that has some useful and legitimately admirable features.
This is the way I think, because I'm a writer, right? But I'm a philosopher/writer. We live in fiction and nonfiction. Can you agree with that?
Well, you have to define what you're talking about. I mean, what do you mean?
Fiction means non-truth, I guess, but more of like creative poetry type thing, you know? So you can't substantiate it in science, but you can substantiate it in your mind, okay? That's called fiction, okay? And then nonfiction would be like mathematics, science, something you can test and prove. The
there are both
methods.
Objective and subjective aspects of our existence.
But I'm saying there's nothing else. There's nonfiction and fiction. How about that?
Okay, if that's how you want to characterize that, I can understand that, yeah.
So there's science is more of in the nonfiction, and then poetry or horror movies, you know.
Yeah.
I write movies. So then there's nonfiction, fiction. Can't make it simple. Well, we live in the visible spectrum. If you know anything about the electromagnetic spectrum, so I'm a Caltech scientist type of guy. You know, I don't know if you know. I lived in LA for many years. So anyway, so we live in nonfiction and fiction. Where do we want to live? Do we want to live in make-believe land all the time? I'm sure you know friends and family members that do. Or do you want to live in a base reality, like in science, which I love science. That's how I can have a heart operation, or I can be cured from cancer, or that's important to me, to be able to help my fellow man. Because there's two great commandments: love God, right, and love your neighbor, right?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your perspective on that. What I'm going to do,
love your neighbor.
Exactly.
It doesn't say love yourself. So when we
it says love your neighbor as yourself. So it references yourself in the presumption that each individual does have a certain love for their life and a respect for their own life, and that they would extend that love to other people.
My only point with loving yourself or loving others and loving God is when you help others, basically, when you lose yourself in the service of others, you're only in the service of your God. So I believe that, you know. So I'll let you go, and I appreciate your time.
No problem. All right, take care. Okay, so let's go on. I think he was really tapping into something that when he was talking about the value that he still found in the Book of Mormon, it reminded me of another time that D. Todd Christofferson got in trouble for saying something that a lot of people disagreed with. he was invited to go to the Library of Congress and to give a talk about the literary value and importance of the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon had been identified as a book that had transformed or been essential in the formation of America as a nation. And when I first heard that, I'm like, well, the Book of Mormon, what? But I think when you step back and just detach yourself from all the emotional attachment we have to the issues of Mormonism and realize that, the American westward expansion had to take place at some point. Someone was going to do it. But the thing that in our, reality really facilitated that was the Mormon expansion westward that was fueled by a religious devotion which was formed with the Book of Mormon at its core. And so just from a perspective that looks at how literature interacts with our society and transformed it and expanded it, you cannot really deny that it was an important aspect of the development of America as a nation when you look at the westward expansion aspect of it. And so as much as we just want to see all the harm that comes from using the Book of Mormon to prop up modern day religious authority that then reaches into people's lives and shapes their worldview based on false ideas and false authority, as much as we want to demonize it for that, there is this separate reality about how it is a part of our nation's culture and development. So there's certainly, and that's not even looking at the things that people can still find in the book that they find poetic, that they find beautiful and meaningful in their life. And that can certainly be an unpopular ex-Mormon opinion, that you still continue to find value and worth in the words of the Book of Mormon or even the teachings of the Book of Mormon, even if you see it as a 19th century fiction. Okay. So I didn't want to lose, because I really like this this point that the viewer Adam Skelter made about the unpopular opinion that is unethical to record and post videos of temple ceremonies because the people in attendance did not give consent to being recorded. It's a betrayal of privacy, and worse, it's further exploitation of the exploited. I think this is an important ethical consideration to make, and frequently when you are talking about trying to protect people's rights and trying to make sure that you are taking people who may be the victim of exploitation or oppression or manipulation, and you want to try to rectify that situation, you may find yourself having to weigh two values that you hold with great esteem on both sides. And in the case of the temple ceremony, you want to defend and protect vulnerable people who may join the church without realizing the full extent of the nature of the religion that they're joining, and then balancing that with the interests of privacy and confidentiality of people that are in the temple performing the ceremonies when they're recorded, because both of those things are important moral and ethical considerations. And so I think even if somebody expresses that, if you simply say, well, you're a hater, shut up and go away, then you're not really going to learn anything. You're not going to evolve or develop your own kind of flexing your muscles about how do we weigh conflicting moral and ethical principles and figure out whether or not there's a way to move forward and prioritize one or the other, sacrifice one for the other. Even in wider society, we are faced with having to weigh different moral and ethical concerns and the interests of different parties all the time. And it's really hard to navigate those things. If you just Google TERF, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, and look at the issue of the conflict that happens whenever somebody tries to, what they, in one side of that argument, in their mind, they're trying to defend the rights and interests of non-trans women. And the people on the other side are trying to defend the interests of trans men and women. And so both of them believe that they're acting in the interests of an oppressed group. It's just they have different moral frameworks that inform their approach to it. And if the response to that conflict is simply, you're hateful, you're a bigot, and get all my internet friends to pound down on you and get you deplatformed, to get you fired, well, then you're not actually educating or informing people. You're essentially engaging in a mob action. And so there's got to be a way to move forward that actually realizes we're weighing different values and different interests and different ethical concerns. So I really love that thought. Okay, so let's see here. Any other comments? If you would like to call in, the phone number is 210-422-2222. I'm going to turn on my, I think before I turned off the voice changer on that one, it was going okay. Let's see here. All right, unpopular opinion. Church leaders actually believe that tithing will result in financial blessings. They're not just saying that to manipulate folks. I think that is that an unpopular opinion? I don't know. It may very well be, because I know most of the time when you get on the forums and you listen to the way Mormons talk about tithing, we assume that all the messaging that they're giving us is really, we want to use fear, we want to use greed, we want to use selfishness to try to psychologically manipulate people to pay tithing, and that everything that they do is out of manipulation. I think if we were going to consider that opinion, they actually believe these things. Well, I think there's an easy way to extend a bit of charity to the leaders, and that is just think about yourself. When you were a believing member and you were asked to give a talk on tithing, you very likely would have repeated the exact same things that you heard the general authorities say, earnestly believing them in your heart, because that was the reality of the world with which you were given. And just the same way, if you happen to be the bishop when you were doing that, some disgruntled ex-Mormon could look at you and say, well, you're manipulating people, when you weren't. You were just trying to convey these ideas in the language that you were familiar with based on the authority that you accepted, blindly or not. And I get the sense that a lot of the general authorities themselves, as they ascend the ladders of power to a certain point anyway, are really living on statements of past general authorities, authentically believing them to be true. And if you look at the account of Grant Palmer, he acknowledges that a lot of the people get to the level of apostle believing that the church is true. And he asserts that the apostles quickly, within 6 months to a year, realize that the foundations of the church are illegitimate and realize that they're false. And if you believe that and apply it to the whole population, then it's hard to see them as doing anything other than manipulative in what they do, especially when the church has already amassed over $100 billion. All right, 16-bit from Sega 16. I think ex-Mormons stop questioning things once it goes past religion. And I think that it's probably uncharitable to make that as a broad blanket statement, but it is one of the caveats that we need to keep in mind as we move forward in our lives. And, ironically, the guy I first heard it from, Mike Norton, who was the guy who filmed the temple ceremonies. He used to say, or popularly said, the one thing that blinds you from seeing the truth is the belief that you already have it. And in a lot of aspects, when you leave Mormonism and you start to make your way in the world and figure out your own way of thinking, there may be things that you believe you already have the truth on, and so you stop looking for it, that don't have anything to do with Mormonism. It's just part of the human condition. So we all have to have that, they call it epistemological humility about what we know to be true and how we know it to be true and whether or not those things are 100% or not. Okay. All right, so if you'd like to join in by phone, you can call 210-422-2222. Let's see here. All right, Skelter gives us another unpopular opinion. Whether Joseph Smith believed in his own prophecies or was just a charlatan is largely irrelevant. What makes Mormonism fascinating is the fact that a group of people needed that narrative to gather under that umbrella. Demonizing Smith is a form of scapegoating. Excessive vilification is naive as idealizing him. Now, that is an interesting perspective. Now, many of you probably don't know Adam Skelter. I'm a little with his work. He's a phenomenal artist and storyteller. He's got an amazing series on the art of storytelling, but it focuses on the power of narrative and how that interacts with the human psyche and makes compelling story as it shapes the way you see yourself in the world around you. And I think there's a real power in that. And if you pay attention to what postmodernists have to say about the power of language and the dominant ideologies in a society and how it limits and frames how individuals think in a society, there's something really true about that. The challenge comes when those ideologies or those narratives conflict with the objective real world. That's where you really have to figure out what is a narrative and what is objective reality. But those are really powerful forces. So when you look at the story of Joseph Smith, he's right. It's not just that Joseph Smith created this magical, marvelous religious narrative, but that there were enough people around there that were so attractive and found that narrative so appealing, and by definition, it gave them meaning in their life. You know, you could be a farmer dealing with all of the travesties of life, feeling dejected, you know, feeling like a terrible sinner without hope as a Calvinist or something like that. But then suddenly this new religious paradigm that you learn about and accept, suddenly you see yourself as a God in embryo, somebody whose divine nature is undeniable and whose divine potential places you at the same level as God himself for your own future, so that you can achieve that in your own hope and your own glories in the eternal worlds. Well, suddenly that story is a story that you would much rather want to inhabit than, you know, perhaps the more gloomy, dismal one that you had before. And so it's really powerful to understand why that would be so appealing. And I think you can go and look at any you know, religious movement centered around a charismatic individual that has an appealing story. And if you just step back and ask yourself, why do people find this so appealing that they're willing to throw away whatever past life they have and go and follow it? And just try to look for the things that people would actually want. Look for the honey in the pot, look for the cheese in the trap, and you'll find it. Because ideologies that aren't appealing generally won't attract people. And so there's something powerful in understanding the human condition and how those things appeal to people, not only for realizing that those, you know, every point where they appeal to people so much that they disregard their own past identity and adopt this new identity, that reveals a vulnerability in the human psyche, something that people can dangle something in front of you to do to change and alter your life choices. And it's important as you step out of Mormonism to be aware of those things, because they aren't just centered around religion. You can find politics, you can find interpersonal relationships, all of which play upon these vulnerabilities and give you a narrative that shapes your conception of yourself. If you spend some time listening to the stories of battered spouses, whether they're male or female, you'll see a large part of that psychological manipulation is getting the person to believe that they are less capable than they otherwise would be, believing, you know, getting them to believe that they're broken. And what, you know, when you go back and look at how those messages get conveyed, they get conveyed by storytelling, by telling you, you know, what would happen if you tried to go off on your own, by drawing on past failures or past issues and weaving a narrative that shapes how you think about yourself. It's really powerful stuff. And so I appreciate that being a point. Okay, so let's see here. Another unpopular opinion from Kenneth D. I had some pushback and focus on the CES letter over other books, debates, and discussion in a coffee shop meetup. I'm not sure if this is exactly the thing that he's referring to, but I think you will find some people who fetishize the CES letter as though it's the end-all be-all. And so then when they meet someone who is critical of the CES letter but is still an ex-Mormon and says, you know, I don't really like the tone, I feel like he focused on things that were irrelevant, then there can be some conflict there. And certainly one of the things you'll learn is that everybody seems to have their own special, unique reason, or the thing that kind of got them to think about why it is that they don't feel Mormon anymore, or what led them to step out. And it's different for everybody, whether it's the issue or the books that they read or the podcast they listened to. You know, some people were just absolutely floored by things like the Year of Polygamy podcast, whereas other people, it was never even on their radar. And so it's completely expected to see different perspectives about what is effective and what is important. And I think what I'd what I'd like to see more of in the community is, rather than when somebody brings something up saying, that was that's stupid or it's no good, just understand that everything's different. It's going to reach people different ways. And so it's more helpful to ask that person, well, what was it about that particular thing that was so powerful for you? Because that will then give you some idea when you encounter other people in your life who reach out to you with questions or whatever. It can maybe give you a resource. Well, this affected somebody else who valued that particular issue. Why don't I suggest it for them? Maybe it'll be effective for them. So there's different ways to approach these conversations. So I'm getting a text that I just have to respond to real quick. And in the meantime, if anyone would want to call to share their own unpopular opinion, let's see. Okay. Okay, Roger Moffat shares, it's tough to be an ex-Mormon and not an atheist, since the religion is so all or nothing in nature. Once you reject it, you go to the nothing option. I think this is probably one of the more powerful dichotomies that exists in ex-Mormonism. He's right. Mormonism really says, all the other churches are false. Certainly this message has been stronger in the past. Mormonism is the one true church. So if you leave Mormonism, you're basically going to be atheist, because God doesn't really have any, all the other people are basically charlatans and frauds. And so why would you join all of them? And I think you'll see people post frequently in the various groups, I left Mormonism, but I'm still Christian. And I feel like there's really no space here for me. And I think that is something that is hard to really navigate, because people still find a lot of value in religion as a focus of social order. I think it's easy to get stuck. If you grew up in Mormonism, you only see religion as this top-down authoritarian thing. And if you kind of leave Mormonism, look at how other religious groups formulate what the religion itself is in the lives of the members, and you'll see that not all of them have this top-down hierarchy where your existence can only be valid through the spectrum of the religion. Rather, there are religious traditions that really allow you to shape and hold your own conscience and your own way of being, and the religion is more of a story and a narrative that you're able to come together with shared experiences. If you just allow that religion can be more than what the church was, and see that people can still find an ethical place in the construct of that social paradigm, then it's easier to see how people can still be religious even after leaving Mormonism. And that being said, you do have to watch out for other coercive, manipulative religions, because they do exist out there. And the journey out of Mormonism should be an education in some of those red flags, so that you can detect them in other groups and know how much of yourself to give to some of those other groups. So let's see here. If I take this and I go to that, and I take this 3 a day, and I do it submit. All right, we've got a call. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Oh, hi, Jonathan. My name's Matthew Turner.
Okay, well, I'm assuming we don't need the voice changer anymore. Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind?
I was just kind of listening off and on to this conversation, and I have, I guess, a lot of different opinions from a lot of people. You were talking about how most people become atheists after they leave the church, and I've actually gotten more involved in other religions. Like, I'm active in the Episcopal Church, and I have a Zoom study group where we read, of all things, Hare Krishna books. But I still, enjoy studying Mormonism too. I find it to be fascinating. For me, the reason that I left was just because of the realization that these leaders of the LDS Church really don't care, I don't think, about, this is my opinion, they don't really care about the members at all, on an individual basis. They just want to grow the church and make it rich. And so I kind of had a wake up moment when the November 2015 policy came out and started, because I was already aware of a lot of the historical issues and stuff, and I was kind of very nuanced. I was actually very interested, I still am, in the history. But that was kind of my story in a nutshell. So I resigned a little over a year ago.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were moved by the same November policy and what it revealed about the hearts of the brethren and how they saw the plight of people in the world who were affected by that policy. I'm challenging myself more frequently now to try to incorporate some of the idea that you'll see expressed in Jonathan Haidt's book about the righteous mind, where people approach different issues believing that they are doing so out of a moral and ethical framework where their actions and their ideas and what they do is good and right. And so you can even have people who can only see the opposing side as somehow evil, wrong, and bad, yet they see themselves as good and right. And so when I'm faced with that, I have to ask, okay, well, how in the world could the brethren see what they're doing as good and right? And for me, that reaches to a kind of a deeper understanding, or an understanding perhaps of some of the things that inform their actions, even if I disagree with them. Because what that does then is, when you're talking with people and this issue comes up, it allows you to move beyond the thing that you disagree with and address the underlying principle itself. And if you can make any progress in expanding somebody's horizon about the moral framework that underlies the action, then they themselves may start to see the problem with the action itself, if that makes any sense.
Who are you talking about?
Well, I think
themselves, or?
Yeah, I think with the brethren themselves, if you, and this I think sort of happens naturally, particularly with people who, you have a very closely held moral and ethical reason to see the policy as wrong and bad. And I think there's then this extension, this idea that you could say, well, the brethren clearly don't care about people. And they don't care about the effects of their policies. And then if you put yourself in the shoes of a believer of the church, then you could say, well, yeah, they care, but God also is a God of justice. And so as much as we love people, by doing this, it will, perhaps turn their hearts to God. We can look at the Book of Mormon and see how when people were, put through hardship, it caused them to humble themselves and turn to God. So this may be a form of love. And that just is part of the cycle that, I guess once you leave the church, you see the problem with that way of thinking, but it's so hard to break through that shell of thinking if you're conversing with someone.
Yeah, it's a big paradigm shift.
What did you find?
Having been in it, what's that?
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, obviously, having been in it, we should be able to see, somewhat the perspective. And I think that a lot of it can be explained by Dan Vogel's pious fraud theory. But sometimes I wonder if they even realize, if they're cognizant of the fraud. Somewhere there must be some level of understanding, but I think that there's a lot of mind tricks that our own minds play on us, where we're convinced that it must be true, and therefore it's justified. It's a very dangerous thing, actually, that you can see in many different groups, where if somebody has that power, and then they think they know what's good for everybody else, it can be very easily abused.
What was
So I think
the
that they would
change?
say that they, do care about us. But I think that's really obviously not the case from what I see, because it's a matter of priorities. Their priority is to preserve the church and perpetuate the church, and so that colors everything that they do. And so I really actually resent their having given me advice throughout my life and promised me all these things, and the advice was bad and the promises didn't come to fruition. And so here I am at age 50. I'm like, well, I could keep doing these things that they're telling me to do that are not resulting in what they've promised, or I can salvage what I have left of my life and make a way for myself. So that's what I chose to do.
Tell me a bit about how your outlook changed as you entered into your new religious identity and in joining with you said Episcopalian group church?
Yeah.
What is because I know when you leave Mormonism, you have this idea of what religion is, particularly if you were born in it. Was there any transformation of that concept as you entered the wider world of Christianity? How did your perspective on God and religion as a concept evolve?
Well, I've had a kind of a nuanced belief for many years. I'm not necessarily a super literal believer in much, and that's been true for a long time. But Mormonism was my heritage and it was my home. But when there started to be so many conflicts that were so grave and strong, I started kind of looking around for other options. And I just had several experiences in our local Episcopal congregation where, I felt close to the divine, and I felt that kind of enlightenment happening, that spirit of love, that beauty of the liturgy and the worship. And so I was attracted to that. So I think naturally, I'm probably just a naturally religious person. Maybe I have that God gene or something, but
yeah.
I've always been super interested in religion. I've just studied Mormonism and other religions my whole life, so I've just, to me, it was very important to read those scriptures and understand them and make sense, use the religious framework to make sense out of the world and out of my life. And I'm continuing to try and do that. So like I mentioned, I also, enjoy studying some Hindu scriptures, and I find a lot of great information and ideas in that are, the thing about that is they're asking questions that Christianity never even thought of asking, and so they have a lot of different ideas and perspectives that I think are helpful, at least to me.
Well, what has your reception been like in ex-Mormon communities when you talk about your Christian identity apart from Mormonism?
That's a good question. So I'm like a member of the Mormon Enlightenment Facebook group, which, I think I'm pretty well received there. I try not to be, preachy or judgmental, and that's just the way to get along with people. Recently, somebody posted a meme on there that was about James Strang and how so many people followed James Strang, including the three witnesses and Joseph Smith Jr.'s family. So maybe you're in the wrong church, and it was just a joke, But I being the type of person I am, super detail oriented and interested in history, I kind of nitpicked it and made a big deal about how I didn't think it was really all that accurate. But they were nice about it and kind of just ignored me. I knew I was being kind of stupid. But I actually called Bill Shepard and asked him questions about it. And then I shared what Bill said. Nobody cared. But anyway.
All right. Well,
So a
I'm
lot
glad
of
that you're
people on
finding.
there, a lot of people on that Facebook group are very, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain and sense of betrayal, and I certainly identify with that. Another thing that your question makes me think about is, like, for example, I like to listen to Bryce Blankenagel's podcast.
Naked
And he can be
Mormonism.
pretty, and the Glass Box podcast too. And he also was on the My Book of Mormon podcast for a while.
Okay.
And I really like Bryce. I've met him a few times, and I support him on Patreon and all that stuff. But a lot of times I'm listening to him like, dude, you're so harsh, and like, or I'll think, well, that's not really right, or but you got to just understand that everybody has their unique story and their unique perspective, and you got to kind of focus on what's really important and not nitpick on things, which sometimes can be hard for me. But
Yeah. No, believe me,
think if we
I
try
fall
to-
into that same thing. It's like
Yeah.
somebody's wrong on the internet. I need to go correct them.
Exactly.
And I think particularly remembering that everybody, we join and we're part of these groups when, people participating are at all different stages of kind of the grief of leaving the church. And you don't know if they're at the anger stage or if they're really vulnerable and they just need to have some validation. And then they say something that is just their own particular emotional hot take at the time. And then somebody steps in and nitpicks their statement and it just feels disempowering, and it's almost like, well, I just want some acceptance and now I'm getting criticized, and it's really hard to do that, to step back and just say, well, let's just let this happen and not say anything about it. So it's kind of a ballet act that we all learn to perform.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your call.
Thanks, Jonathan. I saw you at Sunstone the summer before last, and I was too shy to say hi. So next time I'll come up to you and say hi.
Oh, please do. I hope I'm not that imposing.
Okay.
Most of the time I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing anyway. So it's always more enjoyable to have someone to talk about.
I love the evil apostate. That's the most awesome ever.
Well, he'll come back soon, hopefully. We'll see. I'm still trying to find the right context for it. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye. All right. Oh, we have another call right away. Let's see what we got. Okay, I got to turn the voice changer on. Well. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I don't know yet. Maybe I have like a lame life.
I have the voice changer on in case you need it.
What's that?
I have the voice changer on so you sound like a chipmunk to the audience in case you need it.
Well, and I hear myself echo, so this is going to drive me nuts. I'm going to try to not let it.
You can pause. You can mute your computer or your. It's not a TV, I guess. It's a computer. That might help.
I've got it on my phone.
Oh, okay.
It's probably because I need to update my phone like a year.
So what's on your mind?
Okay. Your point is today, but I have non-dysplastic syndrome. Okay, leukemia. Anyway, I basically have like a 33% chance of getting leukemia. And I was born with it, the gene, and I'm the only in my family.
Okay, I'm going to pause you because I think that the problem with the audio processing is problematic. I'm going to have to find a different voice changing technology if I do this in the future. If you don't need the voice change, I'm going to turn it off. Is that all right?
Oh, I said it to anybody's
Okay, so it's off now. So
Okay.
your voice may be recognizable, but I think we'll be able to hear you better.
That's totally fine.
Okay, so you were mentioning
I have
that you...
myelodysplastic syndrome,
Okay.
which is, it's a type of leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhat officially diagnosed when I was 31. And I had been out of the church for like 5 years at that point. And so a couple of things. First of all, my family's all very Mormon. Salt Lake County is very, very Mormon. And I mean, to say I've been treated inhumanely would be an understatement. But my problem with Mormonism is that I know they justify how they treat me because they don't care if I die. And that has been said to me by my father, but it is and I was so devout. I mean, I served a mission. I love being a missionary. Like, so I understand the doctrine. I understand their point of view there. But when they look at Earth life as just some measly little thing to get through, it's not really what matters, then they can look at their daughter and sister and niece who has MDS and not give a shit. And it is so disgusting to me. Like, it's been really weird, but I get it because they're so obsessed with the next life, and they're so convinced I'm going to repent and come back to the church after I die. And I just think this should be criminal, because if you did not have those beliefs, I'm positive you guys would be involved in my life and in my treatments and everything. I'm positive. So the fact that they are not, and they justify it by Mormon beliefs, I hate the Mormon church. I think I mean, to me that's so disgusting, but it's real, and it's based on the doctrine of what they believe in the next life, that well, whatever happens to me if I die, it was my time to go. No, if I die and it's because I didn't have support and treatment, well, guess what? Leukemia patients, a big percentage of survival and success in leukemia patients, it's family support.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. What do you think? I guess I get to points where sometimes I will just flat out say I think Mormonism is has some passive murder going on because of the focus on the next life. If you die, sad sort of, but no big deal. So where do you draw the line between fighting for your life?
Yeah. I think you're pointing to some really important aspects of the harm that Mormonism can do by completely disrupting family relationships because of the way that they frame things like what it takes to be an eternal family, and gathering of Israel on both sides of the veil, and what that implies in how families feel that they can be entitled to treat you today. And add on top of that something like a lethal diagnosis or potentially lethal diagnosis, and the need for that family support. And I can completely understand how that could be at once devastating to you and be the source of a great deal of anger towards the church, justified, righteous anger. So I can only extend my sympathy for you in that.
Thank you. Like, I probably noticed, and I never knew anything about leukemia before that. Like, so I technically also have chronic myelomonocytic leukemia. I didn't know you could have a chronic form of leukemia for 30 years, but you can. Like, I truly didn't know anything about it. And so I think that I already had this it already bothered me quite a bit just to see how people didn't seem, in the Mormon church, didn't seem to value earth life a lot. And that's not all members, certainly not all members, but I could also see why it would be easy to justify not really being super worried about it. And so then once this hit me, I mean, it just magnified it. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Because it came out of nowhere. I had broken bones that wouldn't heal. And all of a sudden they're doing these tests. I'm like, holy crap, I have what? So it came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden I'm this person whose earth life and health is the one that seems to not matter because this life is just some stupid thing we're trying to get through. And at the same time, I think that it can cause Mormons to be passively suicidal. They don't, at least the ones in my family. And man, I tell you what, that's enough of them to traumatize me. But there's just such a lack of I guess, honoring earth life from what I see, whether you have a terminal illness or not. But then, I mean, I've had my dad literally let me know that he thinks that this is God's punishment to me. So how unfortunate that I'm diagnosed after I left the church, right? Like, crap. I mean, I was born with it. The genes now confirm it. $20,000 gene tests ordered by University of Utah immunologist confirms I was born with this. So how do you still treat me like I earned this because I left the church? And if I would come back to the church, it would be gone. And they treat me like this is true. They absolutely treat me like that's true.
Yeah, I think that what you're describing finds its expression also in the way that some people in hurtful, abusive marriage situations may say, well, in the next life, things will be better. And so I just have to hang on and endure to the end because that covenant will be my ticket to having all of this healed in the next life. I mean, it just, that idea where the narrative and the story that we're given as Mormons about the afterlife and the promises about that and the requirements in this life to get there really does affect your decisions and the way that you see things like family relationships. So I can see that you understand why your family would do those things itself, but to some extent, I see you locating the blame or the primary fault for that on the church itself for imposing these harmful narratives on your family. And one of the things
I think and you should, and feel free to tell me if I shouldn't do that. I do try to do that to feel less personally hurt by them. Yeah. I try to remind myself they treat me this way because of the Mormon church. So then, yes, it makes me hate the church more, but I'd prefer that than hating them.
Yeah, and I think when you see people make decisions where the dogma of the church overrides what their own personal preferences or values would be, it's hard not to think about Steve Hassan, who was a survivor of the Mooney cult. He talks about there being kind of a cult identity and an individual identity. And you can almost have your individual identity, but anytime there's an issue that conflicts with the cult identity, then the cult identity takes over. And it's almost like you're a different person. You're the person plus the group and its ideology. You're not just the person. And in one instance, it can help you see your loved ones as not the embodiment of the hate that they're giving you, but just vessels of it, wittingly or unwittingly. I think we do have to. There comes a point where there is still personal accountability for the choices you make in that realm of ideology, but it is a way to soften, I think, how we see our family and loved ones who make those choices. And maybe that softening gives room for there to be growth and healing in the future with a way. I think it'll be a lot easier if you do have a family member that wakes up and starts to reconnect with you, prioritizing their relationship with you in the now over the church's dogma. It'll be easier for you to connect with them because you won't have this, I guess, mental block seeing them as the primary bad guy rather than the church itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess also, I mean, I can say this like it should be simple, and clearly it's not. But I think because their attitude is based on the doctrine and not opinions, not whatever they decide to call opinions from conference talks. Yeah. No, it's actually the doctrine of the next life. I can't figure out how there can't be some like criminal aspect to this with things like suicide and with things like medical negligence even. And I just think there's something so strange about it, because I think a lot is brushed off in the name of the religion, and that I just think it should be seen as criminal. I know I can't make it seem that way, and it isn't as simple as I'm making it seem like it should be, but if I've told this to my mom. I said, Mom, anyone can make a religion. I could decide to make a religion, and I start it, and in my religion, the next life is absolutely all that matters, and all we need in this earth life is a body. So the minute a baby's born, I kill the baby, and that's me being kind. That's me doing the baby a favor. I'll let you skip all this. Well, if that's if unless that's a worldwide view that's accepted, that's not okay for me to do that. Yeah. And I don't know. And maybe my analogy is way off, or maybe it's not, but it's strange to me that that earth life can be, I mean, even sometimes the general conference talks just irk me because, you know, somebody will die, whether it's, you know, Russell and Nelson talking about his granddaughter or granddaughter-in-law or whoever, her father dying. Like, there's like a casualness to death that really bothers me. And I don't want everyone to be devastated all the time when somebody dies, but I'm really bothered by the casualness of it, because I did happen to see that part live over the weekend. And I happen to live next door to my parents. It's really awesome. And I just picture them next door watching that and having it confirmed to them that it is fine how they treat me, because he just made it seem so casual, like, you know, oh, you just see the big picture. Just see the big picture. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, you asshole. This is why my parents don't care.
Yeah, and then if you go to your parents and you try to explain your perspective, they're just going to look at you and say myopic.
Yes.
And that'll be the end of the discussion.
And because it affects, I mean, and I'll go into suicide again. I'm not suicidal at all. In fact, thank goodness, I've got a lot of self-esteem, or I'd be screwed with how I'm treated. But, and I shouldn't state it like that. It doesn't mean everyone who's suicidal doesn't have good self-esteem. I shouldn't have said it like that. But I just think, you know, like the potential, there's so much more suicide. The epidemic of suicide is huge. And somebody could not have those tendencies, but then have their life be treated so casually by their loved ones and have it seem like not a big deal when they die. And it seems like that could easily be contributing to this epidemic. I don't know. I mean, I'm going off in a lot of directions, but as far as just Earth life, I wish that objectively worldwide religion, like you can have your religious beliefs, but there was some big rule where you could not let them interfere in an event where someone's life is on the line, whether it's a medical procedure that's $100,000, like just whatever the case is, that no matter what, you cannot let your beliefs of what happens in the next life make it so you don't fight your hardest. Like, you just have to assume there is no next life. I just wish there was a rule where you had to, because if I made up my own religion, and in my religion, in my little community, I go set up somewhere, all you need is a body, and so I kill the baby right when they're born, thinking I'm doing something great. It's just not okay. And what difference is it if there is a difference, but say a baby is left to die at 3 months old versus me at 34. Why is that seen different? If there was an opportunity for me to live longer, and the facts were out there, whether it's the studies on family support helping you live longer if you've got a terminal disease or whatever the case may be, why is it okay then for them to not give me that? And I can be really dramatic and call that then fine. If that's proven, and my family literally knows this because I've told it to them, that family support is critical for survival and extended life in cases like this, and then they intentionally, knowingly, like, don't give it to you. How is that? I just wish it could somehow be like criminal. I don't even.
Yeah. And it's funny, the example that you give has a precedent in Mormon history where when they published the the Council of 50 Minutes, one of the statements attributed to Brigham Young was that they were sick of proselytizing a certain group of people that just did not like the Mormons. They said, we'll kill them and then baptize them for the dead afterwards.
Okay.
And so it's just like taking a gospel idea and showing how it could be abused in a very hurtful way. That happens with all kinds of Mormon dogma, is that it ends up having unintended or kind of effective damage just because of the nature of it itself. And unfortunately, especially if you're not in the church and you see it for what it is, it really affects your life. Have you had any success in talking to your family and explaining to them? I mean, it sounds like you've on multiple times told them how you feel about it, do they understand what type of support that you're looking for? Because there's a wide variety of Mormon families out there, some of whom would be punitive for any child who actively left the church, but others of whom would say, your relationship with the church is different from your relationship with us. And if you need me to be there when you go for your treatments or go for your scans, I'll be there for you. I'll drive you. Do they know what type of support you're looking for?
Yes. And actually, when my mom was more open, she and I would have these conversations, and it broke her heart, because she, until, and this is a whole different thing, until she got a priesthood blessing, no joke, a priesthood blessing telling her to uninvolve herself from my life. That's literal. She was
that from
humble.
The father, or who?
Yep.
Who?
Yep. Oh, believe me, I have a lot of problems with this church. So she literally got a priesthood. I mean, he just knows how to trump anything with that power. So he did it. And but before then, so I had a sibling, and my dad, I told him, I'm like, it's just really hard to deal with. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Man, don't live in Salt Lake if you have MDS. The doctors, I don't care. University of Utah, Huntsman, man, they've got a handful of good ones, but they are not, they struggle with some stuff. So it has been hard in that aspect. So as far as not just being diagnosed and living through it, there's some stuff that has to be addressed more correctly. And so I tell them, I'm like, I could just use encouragement. I'm exhausted every day. I have to go back up to the hospital, battle this person, get this corrected. And I'm like, just encouragement, like funny gifts or memes. So I had a sibling and my dad will say, absolutely, 100%, we can do that. I'll do it every day. And ask me how long that went. And so it almost made me feel worse that they asked. I would have preferred they did they came to me and said, what can I do? And I said, this is what you can do. Great, I can do that. I can send you the best things every day. And then I get 2 in the next 4 months? What? Now I feel even worse. So little things, I mean, it's very literal how obvious the lack of encouragement and care is, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
No, just seeing the type of splash damage that can happen with this stuff in the lives of people who really need it is hard. And then the onus is always put on you to find a way to work through their indoctrination to find a connection that can happen. And it could take the form of saying, listen, you guys are called upon to be Christ and to take care of the needy and the sick. And regardless of what you think of me, I'm needy and I'm sick. And, Christ was willing to go out and help the people that the Pharisees condemned. He was helping the prostitutes and even the tax collectors. And, are you saying that I'm worse and less worthy of your support as representatives of Christ than a tax collector? Maybe that'll reach your dad. It depends if he's a Benson.
When before my mom, I can't even, I wish I was exaggerating this. She got priesthood blessing, and then I live next door to my parents, and I haven't seen or spoken to my mom in more than a year since she got that blessing. So we're talking 100%. She was no longer, according to God via priesthood, she was to no longer associate with me.
Well, you're seeing Go ahead.
But I want to say she had that attitude. She absolutely had the attitude. She would say that she actually thinks that God may have and I'm more open. I've been out of the church 8 or 9 years. I'm more open now to the idea of God. It took me a long time to realize there can be a God that isn't the definition of Mormon God. So I don't have a problem talking about the existence of God. And she would say that she thinks that part of this, God knew that I could handle it, and that it's actually to test my family, because she can't believe how disgusted she is by her own children and her husband. I mean, those conversations have been numerous. And so she believed that it was to teach some compassion, and she actually has told me she thinks that God wanted me to leave the church because I haven't become some scumbag after I left. I'm still a good person, and she thinks that I was supposed to leave. So it's really, it's strange, because she had that, she saw it that way. She thought that it was a great opportunity for my siblings and my dad to, and extended family, to learn compassion. And I just want to be like, newsflash, you failed. You all failed. And if you put Christianity, you put the gospel of Jesus Christ to shame. It's perplexing to me. I have a hard time trying to understand it, but I do. What I think really haunts me is that I realize I know them well enough to know that if they didn't have such an obsessive belief in the next life, oh, my life right now would be so different. They would be so different toward me. And it really, really bugs me that they're able to justify just not caring about what happens to me because this earth life doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well,
So,
that's
anyway.
the same thing that you'll see other people talk about in other religious paradigms, where the, losing a belief in the afterlife makes the current life all the more important, which then amplifies the importance that you place on your familial relationships, your friendship relationships. That being said, though, there's people who still may see value in the afterlife, but that doesn't mean that you have to push somebody who doesn't believe in the afterlife away. And you could still be completely empathetic and wanting to help them. And that's where all of these other messages about what are essentially coercive and manipulative ways to try to get people to fall back into the ideology really get in the way. And I'm sorry that you're finding the victim, finding yourself the victim, or the target of that type of hurtful and harmful behavior. But it sounds like your mother may be somebody who still, there's a connection there that somewhat transcends the religious ideology, and fostering that relationship may be the lifeline that you have. It's really hard. I found with my own mom, initially it was really tough for her, but she evolved and she softened over time. And so I continue to have a good relationship with her that is different from what it was when I first left the church. And so there can still be some hope there, particularly if you see those, those principles at play where they value your relationship apart from the church ideology. It's very helpful.
Unfortunately, I do understand what you're saying. I'm glad things worked out better with your mom. I'm not going to sugarcoat my dad. It's bad. She has no, even if I wanted to contact her, I would have no way to.
Oh, so you're completely shut off and shunned from contact of your family now?
Of my mom, and they're both retired, so there's no way for me to.
Next door neighbor.
Access her. Yep, and he hacks her emails. It's bad.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
And he didn't like that she was supported. She's completely supporting me, and I will give him credit. He's a smart guy. He's creepily intelligent, and when I found out through a neighbor who let it slip that priesthood blessing happened, I just thought, man, he's good. He's good. He knew. She cared. The only thing she cared about was my health, and she was talking about, maybe let's just go out of Utah. Let's go to a faster place. It's going to treat you faster. Just days before, she was all in. She was just totally invested. She gets how serious it is, and so what does he do? He stops her with the thing that he knows will work.
Yeah, that's that priesthood manipulation that some men craft so well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my heart goes out to you, and it sounds like you're finding your own inner strength to combat that, even though you've got the loss of what should be a very supportive family. So I wish you the best.
Well, thank you. Hey, can I ask one more? It's kind of separate. Like, maybe this will be. I hope more people think about this, but let me ask you real quick, because I wish there was some way. Like, I think I've asked a few people if it's possible. I wish there were a way that I could sign some paper, legal document or something saying absolutely no baptizing me in the temple. Like, none of that baptisms for the dead. I do not want that allowed. Do you happen to know if there's any, and maybe it's me being stubborn, but I would love like an opportunity, because it's not like I think it works, but I would like to be able to show my family, no matter what you tell yourself, I have now chosen you. We will not be together forever. I won't be there. So just so you know, because I know they're counting on that.
Yeah, I don't know of. The only way that you could conceivably do it is to do your genealogy and discover that you were descended from a Jewish person who died in the Holocaust, and then the church would not posthumously baptize you. But that's the only way that I know to prevent it. So that's an interesting service, though, because if somebody could develop some sort of list, then it's interesting to see if that could happen. But
Well, then at least they couldn't sit there milking and betting on, I mean, not even betting, like just being so sure, oh, it's not a big deal because we'll have her forever.
yeah,
She'll repent. No, I won't. Here it is in writing.
right.
It's not going to happen. So it's now.
If you value me, connect with me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Unfortunately, that's a bluff that I wouldn't want to have
Thanks
called.
for your time.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was a little bit different from the theme of today, but I think it was an important discussion to have because the unintended consequences of theology that, while perhaps appealing to some with the promise of eternal families, can have really hurtful consequences in the here and now, is manifest in stories like that. That's really, really tough. Okay. All right, so our theme for today are unpopular opinions. I had the idea to do this a while ago. I don't know if I've implemented it the right way. I'm going to have to find a different voice disguising thing because I think I get the sense that there are people who think differently from the kind of the accepted ex-Mormon opinions that you can see out there that are kind of afraid to voice them. And this, I think, was particularly... it hit me, if you remember from a few years back, with the satire Apology. And the ex-Mormon and Mormon community, it was very vocally criticized when it came out because of accusations of white supremacy and that there was a white savior complex going on. And even people who at first positively commented on the satire itself later would delete their comments or retract it, and a lot of people went from supporting it to not only not supporting it, but also turning and vilifying anyone else who supported it. And what ended up happening is I ended up getting a lot of private messages from people who said, I don't understand why everybody's condemning you rather than the church, but I really believe in what you said in the apology, but I just can't talk about it because I will be completely excoriated. And so I got a number of those messages, and in fact, that was what we saw happening in real time. And so that's kind of an extreme example where you can have unpopular opinions, and certainly people have different perspectives on it. I learned from that episode myself about a more sensitive way to do some of the satirical work that I've done in the past. That was not my first satire. I've done other stuff where I take a look, for example, at the life of Jesus and reimagine what it would be if we applied the current Mormon ideals around bishop interviews to Jesus's environment. You can see some of that around what would Jesus do if he interviewed sinners like bishops do. There were other satirical pieces that I've done in the past, and so one of the things that was, an important part of that is making sure that you set the parameters of the satire and you signify that that's what it is, so that it doesn't hurt people who assume that it's true. And that was really the focus of if I had to do it over again, what I would change. And people still disagree with that. They would say, you have no right to say anything about race in the church. And I think that's where a dialogue can happen, where we can talk about the type of harm that comes from silencing people who have different perspectives on different things and doing it on something based on identity, because that's an issue that's coming up a lot of time. If we go back into history and look at people who were critical of slavery, if we said that nobody who was not a slave themselves could be critical of slavery, then it changes the rules for how the nation conversed about these things. And clearly we have to have people use different creative and literary media means to try to compel people to see a different side of an issue that they may already have. And that was something that was a very early, for me, kind of example of unpopular Mormon opinions that you really could not hold. So we've seen a few of them since then. I think I saw some people comment on another one of, there was, Okay, so here we go. Here's an example. When Mike Norton, again, Mike Norton was the guy who records the temple ceremonies, when he posted on Reddit about using a minor girl to record a church meeting, using a young woman or primary girl, I spoke out against it and was met with a mob of criticism. And then a few weeks later, he came out with the temple porno stunt. So what he's referring to is there was a famous division in the ex-Mormon community around Mike Norton when he announced that he had reached an agreement with a porn actress to sneak into a Mormon temple and film a porno scene in one of the sacred places of the Mormon temple. And that time, I would say that the general consensus in the ex-Mormon community was that that was a terrible idea. It was a manifestation of the worst impulses of people who are critical of the church, and it was not a good look and not anything that anyone in the ex-Mormon community would want to be associated with. And that was a pretty clear cut. There were very few people who were defending Mike on that issue. And so at that time, the unpopular opinion would be, it's okay for Mike to do whatever he wants to do because maybe he'll reach some people that he wouldn't want to reach. And it's hard to have conversations in those. Just by the same token, when you look at an issue, just because perspective is not popular doesn't mean that it's true, but it also doesn't mean that it's wrong. It could be that the popular perspective is one that is informed better by an understanding of ethical and moral behavior, an understanding of how it would be received by different populations, and depending on what your values and what your priorities are, that is the right way to go. So that was a pretty dramatic example. Okay. Well, I think if we don't have any other callers, I am going to log off. Hopefully we'll be able to... Okay, hold on. This is another caller. I don't know if it's... Let's see what we got. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. I don't have the voice changer on. Hello? I can't hear anything. All right. That may have been somebody looking for a taxi cab. Anyway, all right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up right here. I'll probably see if I do something like the Unpopular Opinion show in the future. I'll try to give it a little bit more lead time so people can have some discussion about what they might want to voice, because I'd like people to be able to call and to say things that they wouldn't otherwise feel safe saying, because there's some value in having a space where you can actually say things that you would otherwise be socially stigmatized for saying. And I think a criticism will be, well, wait a second, if you do that, then people will say hateful, racist, phobic, bigoted things. And the response to that is, that's okay. If people say those things, then it gives us an opportunity to respond with a moral and ethical and reasoned argument, which advances the discussion because it bolsters the foundation of why and how we know that those ideas are wrong. And when you do that in your online communications, when rather than just simply call somebody a bigot and walk away or push them away, you go through the exercise of formulating as clearly and concisely a response framed in moral, ethical, and reasonable terms, then it's kind of like flexing a muscle. You become more adept at that. And every time you do it, you challenge your own ideas, because you may be confronted with something that is a little bit different from the usual position, and you have to reevaluate your position and make sure that it is still consistent. Sometimes you can hold a position, be confronted with something that other people say is bigoted somehow, and then when you try to formulate an argument to respond to it, you realize that you had to add some detail, some nuance, some additional moral strength or moral argument, or give ground even, in order to account for these things in a way that makes rational, moral, and ethical sense. So I would encourage you to engage rather than challenge ourselves. So with that said, we'll see you next time. This has been Talk on Things and Stuff.